The hangar bay of Luna Station echoed with derisive laughter. A group of Galactic Confederation ambassadors, their iridescent robes gleaming under the harsh industrial lights, stood before what they considered an embarrassment to modern spacefaring civilization. The vessel in question was the CSS Phoenix, a retrofitted cargo hauler that looked more like a floating scrapyard than a spacecraft. Sarah Chin, the 34-year-old chief engineer behind the Phoenix project, stood her ground. Her dark eyes remained fixed on her creation while the alien diplomats continued their thinly veiled mockery. Her weathered jumpsuit, covered in grease stains and bearing the patches of a dozen different space stations, marked her as a working engineer rather than a theoretical scientist. You expect this primitive construct to serve as Earth's contribution to the Confederation fleet? The Arxian ambassador's translator couldn't quite mask the contempt in his harmonics. His crystalline form shifted colors in what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of a condescending smile. With all due respect, Ambassador, Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady, the Phoenix may not look impressive, but she's got a few tricks up her sleeve that might surprise you. The gathered aliens exchanged glances, at least those with recognizable eyes did. The Arxians' crystal structure simply pulsed with amusement. They had seen Earth's technological level. Barely a century into space travel, humans were considered little more than clever primitives who had stumbled onto the galactic stage too early. What none of them knew was that Sarah had spent the last 5 years integrating salvaged alien tech with human ingenuity in ways the Confederation had never considered. The Phoenix's heart was a fusion of Earth's primitive nuclear engines and modified tachyon drive components. The combination shouldn't have worked, at least according to conventional wisdom. Perhaps, the MRRN representative chittered through their mandibles, you would be better served accepting our offer of standardized vessels. They're proven designs, tested across 1,000 worlds. Sarah walked to the ship's hull, placing her hand on the rough metal surface. The thing about standardized designs, she said, is that they're predictable. Every race in the Confederation uses the same basic principles, the same approaches to propulsion, shields, and weapons. Nobody thinks outside the box anymore because your tech is so advanced, you don't need to. The Phoenix's external hull was deliberately misleading. Beneath the scarred plates lay a network of modified shield emitters. Rather than creating a standard energy barrier, they could transform the ship's entire hull into one massive deflector array, using the metal itself as an amplifier. It was the kind of jury-rigged solution that would make any Confederation engineer faint, but Sarah had tested it extensively. It worked. We have achieved perfection in our designs, the Arxian stated flatly. There is no need for creativity. A warning klaxon cut through the air, interrupting the conversation. Red emergency lights began pulsing throughout the hangar. Sarah's comm unit crackled to life with a priority message from Earth Defense Command. All stations, this is not a drill. Multiple unknown vessels have appeared at the edge of the solar system. They're not responding to hails and are advancing rapidly. These are not Confederation signatures. Repeat, these are not Confederation vessels. The ambassador's demeanor changed instantly. The Arxian's crystalline form darkened with concern, while the MRRN's antennae went rigid with alarm. They had all heard the rumors of the Zarkak's Dominion's expansion, but no one had expected them to strike here, in a system barely worth noting on galactic maps. Sarah was already moving. Phoenix is ready for immediate launch, she announced, heading for the entry hatch. You might want to clear the hangar. You cannot be serious, the Arxian called after her. That vessel wouldn't last 10 seconds against a Zarkak's war fleet. Sarah paused at the hatch, looking back at the gathered ambassadors. Maybe, she said with a slight smile, but you haven't seen what a primitive ship can do when it's got a crew with nothing to lose and everything to prove. The hangar bay doors began to open, revealing the star-filled expanse beyond. As Sarah sealed the hatch behind her, she could hear the ambassadors being ushered to safety by security personnel. They didn't believe the Phoenix stood a chance. But then again, they didn't know about the experimental quantum capacitors she'd rebuilt using old microwave oven parts, or the targeting system she'd crafted from modified video game console processors. Sometimes, she thought as she strapped into the pilot seat, the best innovations come from having to work with whatever you've got on hand. and humanity had gotten very good at making the most of limited resources. The Phoenix's engines hummed to life, a sound unlike anything in the Confederation fleet. It was time to show the galaxy what primitive technology could really do. Space around Luna Station erupted into chaos as the Zarkax fleet emerged from their final jump point. Sarah counted 30 warships, their angular black hulls absorbing what little sunlight reached this far out. They were arranged in the infamous spear formation, a tactical pattern the Dominion used when they weren't interested in negotiations. Phoenix Actual, this is Earth Defense Command, her calm crackled. You are ordered to fall back to defensive position Alpha. The Confederation fleet is 8 hours out. Sarah's fingers danced across her customized control panel. Negative, Command. We won't have a planet left in 8 hours. Request permission to engage. There was a long pause. Everyone knew the Phoenix was supposed to be a proof of concept, not a frontline combat vessel. Finally, the response came, permission granted. Good hunting, Phoenix. The first wave of Zarkax fighters launched from their carriers, their energy signatures lighting up Sarah's jury-rigged sensor array. The display was actually a modified virtual reality gaming screen. It provided better 3D spatial awareness than traditional military displays. Let's see how they handle something unexpected, Sarah muttered. She activated her ship's primary innovation, the quantum scatter drive. The system used salvaged teleporter parts combined with a deliberately unstable warp field. On paper, it shouldn't work. In practice, it made the Phoenix nearly impossible to target. The Zarkax fighters approached in perfect formation, their targeting systems locked onto the lone Earth vessel. The first volley of energy weapons lanced out and passed through empty space as the Phoenix seemed to blur and shift, appearing 50 kilometers off their port side. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as confusion rippled through the enemy formation. The quantum scatter drive didn't just move the ship, it created multiple quantum probability shadows. To the enemy's sensors, the Phoenix appeared to be in several places simultaneously. Now for part 2, she said, activating her modified weapons system. Instead of conventional energy weapons, she had adapted old satellite broadcasting equipment to create what she called a frequency disruptor. It transmitted on the exact resonance frequency of standard shield systems. The lead Zarkax fighters' shields didn't just fail, they imploded, creating a feedback loop that overloaded their power grid. The ship drifted dead in space, its crew likely unconscious from the power surge. 2 more fighters suffered the same fate before the others began taking evasive action. Back in the Confederation observation room on Luna Station, the ambassadors watched in stunned silence. The Arxian's crystalline form had shifted to a pale blue of disbelief. Impossible, the MRRN representative chittered. She's using banned frequencies that shouldn't even work with that level of technology. Sarah's voice came over the command channel. That's the thing about human technology, we don't know enough to know what's impossible. The main Zarkax fleet was adjusting their approach, bringing their heavy weapons to bear. Sarah knew the Phoenix couldn't take a direct hit from their primary cannons. But she had one more surprise ready. She activated her final modification, what she called the mirror box. It was a crazy combination of old-style radar systems and quantum entanglement principles. The theory was simple: reflect the enemy's own energy signature back at them, magnified and chaotic. The first Zarkax destroyer fired its main weapon, a concentrated beam of plasma that could melt through a small moon. The beam struck the Phoenix's field and split into dozens of smaller beams that shot back toward the Zarkax fleet. Their own shields, calibrated for dealing with standard weapons, struggled to cope with the reflected energy. This is impossible. The Zarkax commander's transmission broke through on all frequencies. What kind of technology is this? The kind you get, Sarah responded, allowing herself a grim smile, when you can't afford to buy the latest and greatest. Sometimes you have to innovate. The battle was far from over. The Phoenix's systems were already showing strain from the unconventional modifications. Warning lights flashed across her console as power fluctuations threatened to overwhelm the jury-rigged systems. But Sarah had achieved her primary goal. The Zarkax fleet's perfect formation had broken. Their confidence was shaken. For the first time, they faced something their advanced targeting systems couldn't predict. Their shields couldn't completely block, and their tactical computers couldn't analyze. Sometimes, Sarah reflected as she prepared for the next phase of the battle. The greatest advantage isn't having the most advanced technology, it's having technology your enemy doesn't understand. The void between Earth and Luna became a light show of impossible physics. The Phoenix danced through space in ways that defied conventional navigation, leaving confused Zarkax gunners firing at shadows. But Sarah knew she couldn't keep this up forever. Her ship's makeshift systems were already showing signs of strain. Warning indicators flashed across her console as the quantum capacitors began to overheat. The old microwave parts were never designed for this kind of power output. Sarah diverted cooling systems from non-essential areas, buying herself precious minutes. Phoenix, this is command. Multiple Zarkax vessels are breaking through to attack Earth directly. We need you to dash. Already on it, Sarah cut in, her fingers flying across the controls. She had anticipated this move. The Zarkax weren't known for their subtlety. While their main fleet engaged the irritating human ship, they'd send their fastest vessels for a decisive strike. What they didn't expect was for Sarah to trigger what she called her patchwork protocol. The Phoenix's hull began to glow with an eerie blue light as hundreds of mismatched shield emitters activated simultaneously. Each one operated on a different frequency, creating a cascade of electromagnetic interference that played havoc with the Zarkax's sophisticated targeting systems. How are you generating that level of interference with such primitive technology? The Zarkax commander's voice held equal parts fury and fascination. Sarah didn't respond. She was too busy implementing the next phase of her plan. The Phoenix's engines screamed as she pushed them beyond their rated limits. She'd reinforced them with salvaged structural supports from old Earth satellites, not pretty, but effective. The ship accelerated directly toward the Zarkax breakthrough group. Her tactical display showed 5 destroyers, each one capable of reducing a small city to ash. But Sarah had studied their attack patterns, their shield configurations, their weapon cycles. More importantly, she understood something they'd forgotten in their technological advancement. Sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective. She activated her mirror box again, but this time with a twist. Instead of reflecting their energy weapons, she used it to amplify and redirect the natural solar radiation from the sun. The resulting burst of focused solar energy wasn't particularly powerful by Zarkax standards, but it came from an unexpected direction and on frequencies their shields weren't configured to block. 2 of the destroyers veered off course, their sensor arrays temporarily blinded. A third spun into an emergency maneuver that brought it directly into the path of its companion ship. They didn't collide, but their shield harmonics interfered with each other, creating a momentary weakness. Sarah seized the opportunity. The Phoenix's makeshift weapons might not be able to penetrate Zarkax shields directly, but they didn't need to. She fired a barrage of modified communication buoys, literally old satellite components rewired to emit focused electromagnetic pulses. They slipped through the interference zone between the destroyer's shields and detonated. The explosion wasn't particularly impressive by space battle standards. But the electromagnetic pulse played havoc with the destroyer's delicate control systems. Both ships began to drift, their crews scrambling to restore power. This is impossible. The Zarkax commander's voice had lost its usual arrogance. Your technology is centuries behind ours. Maybe, Sarah replied, allowing herself a small smile as she lined up her next shot. But while you were perfecting your advances, we were learning to work with what we had. Sometimes the best solutions aren't the most advanced, they're the most creative. The remaining destroyers regrouped, adjusting their shield frequencies to prevent another such attack. But Sarah had anticipated this too. She'd designed the Phoenix's systems to be unpredictable, to never use the same trick twice in exactly the same way. As she prepared for the next phase of the battle, Sarah glanced at her power readings. The jury-rigged systems were holding, barely. She'd need to end this soon, before her modifications gave out completely. But she'd already proven something crucial. Sometimes the greatest advantage in a fight isn't having the best technology, but having technology your enemy doesn't know how to counter. The main Zarkax fleet had regrouped, forming a new attack pattern. Their initial confusion had given way to cold calculation. Dozens of warships moved in perfect synchronization, their black hulls reflecting the distant sunlight like a swarm of deadly insects. Sarah's hands were steady on the controls despite exhaustion setting in. The Phoenix's cobbled-together systems were running hot, pushing well beyond their theoretical limits. Warning lights flickered across her console like a Christmas tree gone wrong. "This is your final warning," the Zarkax commander's voice boomed through the calm. "Your primitive vessel has proven interesting, but you cannot hope to prevail. Surrender now." Sarah checked her readings. The quantum capacitors were nearly burned out. The mirror box was operating at 30% efficiency. But she had one last card to play, something she'd kept hidden until now. "You know what's funny about being primitive?" Sarah broadcast back. "When you can't afford the latest tech, you learn to dig through history for solutions." She activated what she called the Edison Protocol, named after humanity's famous inventor who had tried thousands of solutions before finding one that worked. The Phoenix's hull began to vibrate as hundreds of small ports opened, releasing what looked like space debris. The Zarkax fleet sensors registered the objects as harmless garbage, broken satellite parts, old antenna arrays, pieces of scrap metal. Their advanced targeting systems didn't even bother to track them. That was their mistake. Each piece of debris contained a tiny piece of repurposed Earth technology, old radio transmitters, modified cell phone components, even parts from discarded music players. Individually, they were harmless. Together, they formed a web of interconnected transmitters that Sarah had spent months programming. "Now," Sarah muttered, "let's see how your advanced systems handle a bit of old-school interference." She triggered the network. Suddenly, the space around the Zarkax fleet erupted with overlapping signals. Each piece of debris began broadcasting on different frequencies, creating a cascade of electromagnetic chaos. The signals weren't powerful enough to damage the Zarkax ships directly, but they didn't need to be. The sophisticated targeting systems of the Zarkax fleet, designed to process massive amounts of data in microseconds, began to overload. Their neural-linked weapons, which required precise coordination, started receiving conflicting information. What is this?" The Zarkax commander's voice had lost its arrogance, replaced by genuine confusion. Sarah watched as the mighty fleet began to falter. Ships that relied on perfect coordination were suddenly unable to maintain formation. Weapon systems that needed exact targeting data were firing wildly or not at all. Sometimes, Sarah broadcast, the best way to fight isn't with superior firepower. Sometimes you just need to create enough confusion. She pushed the Phoenix forward, her makeshift weapons targeting the now disorganized fleet. Each shot wasn't particularly powerful, but they didn't need to be. The Zarkax ships, their coordination shattered, couldn't maintain their overlapping shield coverage. The battle wasn't over. The Zarkax still had overwhelming firepower. But their perfect formations were broken. Their confidence was shaken. And in the chaos, Sarah saw her opportunity to turn the tide completely. The space around Earth had become a graveyard of Zarkax pride. Not through destruction, but through disruption. Mighty warships drifted in confused circles, their sophisticated systems overwhelmed by what their commanders had dismissed as primitive technology. Sarah's makeshift command center inside the Phoenix was barely holding together. Smoke drifted from several overloaded circuits, and the acrid smell of burning electronics filled the air. But her eyes remained fixed on the tactical display, watching as her plan reached its critical phase. "All Earth defense stations," she broadcast, "execute Protocol Omega on my mark." Hidden throughout Earth's orbital infrastructure were more of Sarah's primitive innovations. Old television satellites, decommissioned weather stations, even defunct GPS units, all reprogrammed and modified over months of secret preparation. "You cannot hope to defeat us with these tricks." The Zarkax commander's voice had lost its usual smoothness, betraying an edge of desperation. "We are the most advanced civilization in the sector." "That's your problem," Sarah replied, initiating the final sequence. "You've forgotten how to think simply. Mark." Suddenly, every piece of orbital hardware around Earth activated simultaneously. Decades of supposedly obsolete technology came to life, each broadcasting on different frequencies, creating a web of overlapping signals that turned near-Earth space into an electromagnetic storm. The effect on the Zarkak's fleet was immediate and dramatic. Ships that relied on quantum neural links for coordination suddenly found themselves cut off from each other. Weapon systems that needed precise targeting data received nothing but gibberish. The mighty armada, designed to operate as a single coordinated unit, was reduced to individual ships struggling to maintain basic functions. This is impossible. The Zarkak's commander's transmission was breaking up. How can such obsolete technology? Because we learned to work with what we had, Sarah cut in, allowing herself a grim smile. While you were perfecting your advanced systems, we were learning how to make old technology do new things. Sometimes the best solutions aren't the most sophisticated, they're the most adaptable. The Phoenix, despite its failing systems, moved through the chaos like a predator. Sarah had designed her ship to operate in this electromagnetic storm. While the Zarkak's fleet floundered, she picked her targets carefully, using her remaining weapons to disable rather than destroy. From the Confederation observation post on Luna, the gathered ambassadors watched in stunned silence. The Arxion's crystalline form had shifted to a deep purple of amazement, while the MRN's antennae twitched in what might have been respect. She has achieved what our most advanced fleets could not, the MRN representative chittered softly. With technology we would have discarded as worthless. As the battle reached its climax, Sarah activated her final modification, a massive electromagnetic pulse generated by combining the power of every disabled satellite and space station in Earth orbit. The pulse wasn't particularly powerful by Zarkak's standards, but it didn't need to be. Their ships, already struggling with system overloads, couldn't handle another disruption. One by one, the mighty warships of the Zarkak's fleet went dark, their crews forced to activate emergency systems just to maintain life support. The aftermath of the battle marked a turning point in galactic history. The Zarkak's fleet, once the terror of the sector, floated powerless in Earth orbit. Not destroyed, but thoroughly defeated by what they had dismissed as primitive technology. Sarah Chun stood in the main conference chamber of Luna Station, her grease-stained jumpsuit a stark contrast to the elegant attire of the Confederation ambassadors. The Phoenix, her battered but triumphant ship, was visible through the station's observation windows, surrounded by disabled Zarkak's vessels. The Confederation Council has reviewed the events of the battle, the Arxion ambassador announced, his crystalline form glowing with formal colors. We find ourselves reconsidering our previous assessment of Earth's technological contributions. Sarah suppressed a smile. With respect, Ambassador, I don't think you fully understand what happened here today. This wasn't about proving Earth's technology was better. It was about proving that innovation doesn't always mean advancement. Sometimes it means looking at old problems in new ways. The MRRN representative stepped forward, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. You turned our greatest weakness against us. We became so focused on perfection, on advancement, that we forgot the value of simplicity. The Zarkaks made the same mistake, Sarah noted, gesturing to the disabled fleet. They built their entire military around the assumption that newer always meant better. They never considered that someone might use older technology in ways they couldn't predict. The chamber fell silent as a new figure entered, the Zarkak's fleet commander, now a prisoner of war. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by a look of grudging respect. We have spent centuries perfecting our technology, he said quietly. Yet, we were defeated by recycled satellites and modified communication equipment. How is this possible? Sarah walked to the observation window, looking out at her creation. The Phoenix's scarred hull told the story of the battle, each burn mark and dent a testament to human ingenuity. Because humanity never had the luxury of starting with advanced technology, she explained. We had to learn to improvise, to adapt, to find solutions with whatever we had available. Sometimes the strongest innovation comes from necessity. The Confederation Council's decision was unanimous. Earth would not just be granted full membership, they would be asked to establish a new division focused on technological innovation and adaptation. The Phoenix would become the first of a new class of ships, combining the best of both human ingenuity and Confederation technology. As Sarah left the chamber, the Arxian ambassador called after her. "We laughed at your primitive ship," he admitted, his crystalline form shifting to colors of humility. "We were wrong." Sarah paused at the door. "The funny thing about being primitive," she said with a slight smile, "is that it teaches you to think differently. Sometimes the best way forward isn't to advance, it's to remember where you came from and what you learned along the way." In the years that followed, the battle would be studied in military academies across the galaxy. But its greatest legacy wasn't military. It was the reminder that true innovation doesn't always mean creating something new. Sometimes it means finding new ways to use what you already have. The Phoenix remained in service, a symbol of what could be achieved when necessity met ingenuity. And Sarah Chen's name became synonymous with a new philosophy in galactic engineering. Sometimes the most advanced solution is the simplest one.